Introduction to Public History class actually required that our students go out into the nearest community that we could find, and that was the IPFW student community, to document student life on the IPFW student campus. And we have Garrett Chrisman, who actually studied the theater department, Nick Miller and Theodore Wheeler, who studied the anthropology club, one of the most long-standing, long-running clubs at IPFW, and then Tracy Helding-Coburg, who created the project for the IPSGA, the student government. We also had one other group studying the communicator, but we don't have anybody from them here today. So what I wanted our students to do is to basically go through what they had to do in order to create a history of these student organizations. And there are 4 different areas that they are going to talk about, which are a little bit different from a more traditional history class. And you've already seen numerous excellent examples of producing academic history for other classes. The first one is research in actual archives. The students went to the IPFW University Archives and did actual documentary research. The second one is doing oral history, so narrative interviews with people who are involved in these student organizations. The third is to create a museum exhibition, and you guys actually saw the exhibits. They were displayed outside in the foyer, which was actually posted at Helmke Library at the very end of finals week. Last semester, and then finally to write a history of the student organization based upon primary sources, which I can guarantee you is a very different intellectual endeavor than writing history based upon secondary sources when you're dealing with something that historians have actually already written. Basically, working from the primary sources themselves is very, very difficult. So basically, our students are going to be talking about some of the challenges and opportunities that they ran into as they were carrying out these projects. And we will go ahead and start with Garrett and the theater department.
Well, thank you, Professor Woolley. Like the professor said, my name is Garrett Chrisman, although I also go by my alias printed on the card here, Turkey Bacon and Swiss Sub. Personally, I like that name better.
That's my name too.
It's a good name. Family. Okay, so my research was done in IPFW's theater department. Like everybody else, I was assigned a specific group on campus, like the Anthropology Club, the Communicator newspaper, or student government. My work was largely centered around the idea of oral history. And for this, I was given a single subject. His name was Professor Craig Humphrey. He worked in the theater department as the resident costume designer. Before I started this work, actually, I also worked as an intern for the Indiana University Bicentennial Oral History Project. So prior to the class, I actually had experience with the interview format that we'd be conducting. And a lot of my interest in the course while taking it stemmed from my experiences with that internship. And I figured that'd just be some relevant background going into this. Okay, so first up, what is public history exactly? Part of our job here today is explain that to you, give you a little sampler, so to speak. I describe it as history for the people. Like Professor Woolley was saying, it's with the people, by the people. And if that feels a little proletarian for you, I guess that works too. Mm-hmm. We draw connections between these individual people by getting their stories from primary sources. It allows anybody to really share their experiences with the intended project. And although our subjects were largely faculty, at least for the theater department, my group's subjects were all faculty because they were the most readily available. However, with the clubs, the other groups found time to speak with student supervisors and people like that. So perhaps in my presentation, there's a bit more bias towards those who actually facilitate the learning than those who are receiving the education. However, I still feel this angle was very useful to the project as a whole. Now, before I go on, I'm going to introduce you to some key terms that I feel are important to understanding public history, and more specifically, my work with the theater department. First up is an exhibition. Exhibition, it's probably a term you're already somewhat familiar with, as exhibits are regularly shown at museums, in showcases like this even. Our exhibitions are all out there in the lobby if you so choose to take a look at them. I highly recommend it. Then also there are artifacts. Artifacts can be mundane, like sheets of paper describing perhaps tax forms for a specific group, and it can go even as far as it belongs in a museum, Indiana Jones-esque stuff, in my opinion. Although the mundane stuff is what you run into far more often in community work like what we were doing. And even though it is more mundane in appearance, the information that it stores underneath can be equally valuable to the flashy stuff you find in the national museums. Following that, collective memory is another important term, and this describes the way in which a community of people remembers a significant event. And these events can range from the small to the large, and a large example perhaps could be our observance of Pearl Harbor Day. The entire country experiences a day of remembrance for the tragedy that befell the naval base there in Hawaii. And the way we perceive the events that happened on the day and the way we remember it each year on December 7th is an example of collective memory. And lastly, oral history, it is, as simply as I can put it, basically an interview, although the subtleties of which are very complex. Working with individuals who have experienced, say, a traumatic event, you need to be trained in speaking to them with plenty of tact. That is, thankfully, we were not put in a situation where excessive tact was required due to a sensitive subject, but I feel the note is important and relevant still. And something that's not on here actually is the archives, and I'd like to explain the significance of those. The archives in either universities, libraries, anywhere where information is stored and cataloged are very important to the work of a public historian, because this is where you acquire artifacts from. This is where you gain research materials and other primary documents that you then exhibit to a public that would otherwise not have access to them on a normal everyday basis. All right. Next up is, where is public history? Public history is in many ways present everywhere in our everyday lives. I'm going to give 3 very specific examples. One can be considered categorically bad or a failure in that it did not accomplish the goals it set out to achieve. Then after that is a more successful example, followed by one I feel has potential for the future. So first up, we'll start out with the bad, and that would be the Enola Gay exhibit in the Smithsonian Museum. Now, this is something that was born out of good intentions that simply did not get realized. The Enola Gay, for those who don't know, is one of the B-29 superfortresses that flew over Japan to deliver one of the 2 only atomic bombs ever dropped in human history. And traditionally, the world is taught that the bombs were dropped out of necessity, and that American lives, as well as Japanese lives and other soldiers' lives, as well as civilians, were saved by their use in shortening the war. Now, what the Smithsonian sought out to do here was challenge this assertion. Was the dropping of the atomic bombs ultimately necessary? And I have his name here. It was Secretary Robert Adams. He felt that this may not be necessarily true. And so he began planning out an exhibit that would open up a discussion on the topic. This was done in the 90s, and he did it in a way that was not exactly friendly to the public at large, which when working with a collective memory and something the public feels near and dear to, you need to very much work with that same public in order to ensure the exhibit's success. This, the Smithsonian and Robert Adams did not do very well. They were immediately challenged by the AFA, who were the Air Force Association, led by a man named John Carrell. John Carrell felt left out of the exhibit process, and as such, this only solidified his pre-existing beliefs in the traditional story of the Enola Gay and how the bombs dropped on Japan were necessary in saving more American lives. Talks between the two groups were attempted, but nothing was ever remedied, largely due to miscommunication. And ultimately, this led to a sort of limbo for the Enola Gay exhibit in the Smithsonian for a long period of time. And this would accompany sporadic both closings and openings of the exhibit, ultimately followed by the removal of the exhibit entirely from the Smithsonian to Dulles Air Force Base. And even now, the exhibit is a shell of what it was intended to be. It does not challenge anything about the dropping of the atomic bombs. It merely states what the object is and what its role in history was without any further engagement with the community as a whole. Following that, my next example is actually the Holocaust Museum. And this one, our class actually experienced firsthand for ourselves because one of our assignments was to engage with some of the website's different features by reading different personal stories and then leaving comments on it to be seen by the public at large, as the forum was open and some screened comments were available for those who wish to see them. Now, the reason the Holocaust Museum succeeds where the Enola Gay did not is because all groups involved, there was no controversy between the partners and the people who wish to exhibit these stories. And they connect the audience to the issue rather than purely challenging them. And lastly on this list here, IPFW, I believe, is fertile soil for public history in the future. Even now, we have different departments conducting work for perhaps not public history per se, but they conduct research. I know of a sociology professor who gathers interviews and firsthand accounts from homeless veterans in the community. And along with that, there are plenty of other student showcases, just like this one, that connect their work to the community at large, as well as cultural heritage days dedicated by the university itself. All right, so my interview personally was with Craig Humphrey, as I said before. We talked about his life and career. On top of that, we also discussed how the theater department affects IPFW at large. Some of our questions are featured up there on the screen. I started with general background information and worked my way into more personal topics. Ultimately, I did not follow the template strictly to the letter because that would stymie future opportunities for juicier questions. And some of these juicier questions I mentioned are actually about some specific plays. During IPFW Theater's career, it has been known at some points as a rebellious department. After it started in 1964, immediately the theater was seen as a window to the community and that it should challenge normal publicly held beliefs. And they did this through their productions. It was basically the only way they could. And so the first one we see real controversy arising in is the production of Bent, which is a production where the main cast centers around homosexual individuals who were victimized by the Third Reich during World War II. Following that lens, the production of Corpus Christi, which also follows a homosexual male in the Texas town of Corpus Christi, the same name, shows that the department for a time was willing to challenge the public's assertion that they were not indeed anything like the Nazis and that they were a tolerant society, because the characters portrayed, and specifically Bent, were directly fighting a fascist oppressor. And it made people think, if they weren't fully accepting of these LGBTQ individuals, that how are they different from, say, someone like a Nazi soldier during World War II? They are committing, in a way, very similar crimes of discrimination and hate. And along with that came plenty of controversy, as you might imagine. What ended up happening after Corpus Christi was that the university's theater department faced many lawsuits. There were death threats for both of the different productions. With Corpus Christi, however, the fatigue finally set in on the department. And so in recent years, their focus has shifted less from challenging formerly held beliefs of the community, and instead now focuses on the box office. Whether this is good or bad is up to each individual's own personal discretion. But despite these challenges to their cohesion, the IAPFW Theater Department has remained a very tight-knit community. Professor Humphrey describes them, the students and the staff, as working in perfect unison. The staff specifically has a very great working dynamic. They shift roles in the department from tasks like Professor Humphrey switching with another professor from costume design to actually directing a play himself, and then others do the same. Now, why does all this matter? Public history directly educates from the grassroots level. It gets communities involved, and it's my belief that through these smaller communities, we can build larger movements out of them. And IPFW, up to this point, has had these opportunities to build on community questions, societal questions, but the whole thing lacks cohesion. What needs to be done is that these issues need to be brought to the forefront by potentially a group that focuses solely on the portrayal of public history and not just purely scholarly work and academic work. The younger generations have really picked up on things like podcasts, video games, and live demonstrations in these different museums. Media is definitely the way forward. And a large percentage of people today interested in history always point back to stuff they either experienced firsthand or that they found themselves interested in via video games like Battlefield 1 or other historical titles of that nature. And with that, that concludes my presentation.
I'm asked here today to present as a representative of the public history panel and to discuss my experience in our class and what we accomplished. Since there are two of us on this panel that did the same project, I decided to take a different route. Given the nature of our panel, I picked a route more subjective and probably more personal than the others. My presentation today will take us on a journey that encompasses, in my opinion, what it means to be a public historian and why we do what we do. Our jobs as historians, especially public historians, is not simply to engage with the past, but also to bring that engagement to the forefront of the community. We are burdened with the responsibility to maintain our cultural ancestry and inform future generations of their history. Our interpretations of the past are what carries the discourse and discussion of the future. As activist and journalist Marcus Garvey stated, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. People want to know where they came from and who helped shape the world around them. As a senior at IPFW, I have been dutifully engaged with the history department and in correlation involved with 3 internships, 2 museums, and a historic preservation company. Throughout these remarkable experiences, I have been introduced to new perspectives on history. History is not just dark rooms, libraries, and archives, but actually a more inviting and humane environment. More and more people are becoming interested in history, and there are places out there that help provide answers to their curiosity. My first experience in public history was my internship at the Early 48 Museum, which is this. A museum located in Auburn, Indiana, 25 minutes north of here, that doesn't get as much publicity and acknowledgement as it should. The museum is in the process of expanding, which includes a nearly 20,000 square foot addition, 17 more cars being added to its collection, including a 1936 all stainless steel two-door car, which is pictured, a bigger and more public library, and lastly, a replica of the Ford Rotunda on the front of the museum, the original having been burnt down in Dearborn, Michigan in 1962. The significance of these endeavors show how big of a following and support from the community this museum has garnered and how much this community values history. And the Ford Motor Company has a big history. Considering I'm a mechanic, albeit a Chrysler one, and I fully acknowledge I might be a little biased here, but Ford helped put all Americas on wheels. The impact that Ford automobiles had on the nation, let alone the small community of Auburn, Indiana, is profound. By preserving the past and displaying it on a public platform, museums are able to display grassroots achievements and the aspirations of our predecessors. Ford automobiles were designed to help mobilize the masses, the farmer, and the working poor. They were not built for the rich and powerful who already had a monopoly on the car manufacturers. Ford created something out of his own rural Midwestern birth and gave back to his community, America. Along the lines of this kind of tradition, public historians try to give back too. One personal experience of one of the most inspiring and motivational displays of utilizing history was when the V8 Museum was approached by an organization like the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and this organization asked if the museum could help a dying man with a last request. This elderly gentleman remembers when these old relics on wheels were new and pulsing down the road when he was a young boy, and now, with old memories fading fast, one still remained. He wanted to relive a memory of a simpler time and what it was like to be a child again, young, naive, and full of wonder, unaware of the history he was joining in. And that's exactly what happened. He got his chance. Riding in the front seat of a 1930s Ford, that old man was transformed into a young, joyful child again, blissful and happy. This is just a personal example of history's impact on a community and why organizations such as museums should be a staple in the public. They give the community comfort and provide recognition to the humanity's past accomplishments. Speaking of accomplishments, another museum that I'm currently at is Auburn Duesenberg Museum. This nationally renowned museum houses many examples of beautiful cars and marvels of the past. It is designed to educate and inform the public on past events, objects, and people involved with the community. Hopefully, everyone in this room will get the chance to see the elegant cars displayed here. Moreover, the museum is also the building where the corporate headquarters were located, with detailed office layouts and conference rooms still assembled like they were decades ago. However, unlike Ford, these cars were designed and built individually for the rich and powerful, a grandiose display of their money. Furthermore, since these cars were built in Auburn, regardless of whether they are no longer a car manufacturer or not, the museum has a strong public support system and is a prevailing organization in the community. By maintaining the cars, buildings, and all the adornments that go along with the cars, the vehicles can be remembered and put in the front of the masses that flow through its doors. The Armen Duesenberg Museum is a prime example of a community maintaining its historical heritage and sharing it with the wild world. Not only does it encompass the minds of the towns in Auburn, but people donate and drive to see this nationally known museum from all around. Without the support of the public, the unique history of the Auburn Car Company would be lost to us. History needs the public as much as the public needs history. The National Council on Public History states their mission is to inspire public engagement with the past and to serve the needs of practitioners in putting history to work in the world by building community among historians, expanding professional skills and tools, fostering critical reflection on historical practice, and publicly advocating for history and historians. I think no other place does this better than my last internship, Architecture and Community Heritage Incorporated, ARCH. ARCH is located in Fort Wayne and works to preserve Allen County's heritage. It does this by engaging the public with workshops, presentations, and tours of historic neighborhoods and homes. One of the biggest things they do is advocate for historic homes and buildings to be preserved, protected, and restored. Furthermore, they are engaged in registering buildings and districts with the appropriate city, state, and national designations. They accomplish this by building the histories of these places, utilizing their own records, city records, historic surveys, and tax credits, and then nominating these buildings for the National Register of Historic Places. One prime example is their own office building, the Alexander T. Rankin House, a home built in the 1840s by an abolitionist minister, and which was restored to its current state. Arch is a strong example of what public engagement can do and what can be done when the community is involved with history and its process with the future. Public history doesn't just give us facts and provide us with history lessons, it engages us and makes us feel welcomed. We are all part of a community and we all share in history together. By supplying some personal examples, I hope I have provided a personal touch to history and its involvement with the world outside of academia. History is no longer a discipline entombed in an ivory tower, but rather a lighthouse trying to steward the incoming generation through the turbulent times. Times that as a community we have to rough together, with history providing the comfort and hope that we will get through it.
Okay, so I labeled mine public history, collecting it and getting it right, which sounds easy, but is not. And just like pretty much everyone else, I'm going to start with an introduction to public history. I'm going to keep it kind of short though, since we've already talked about it, and I don't have a whole lot of time. So I found this infographic on the internet. I know it's a little blurry, but I really liked how it brought in all of these various things that make public history. And like we've said, according to the National Council of Public History, they describe it as a diverse way in which history is put to work in the world. In the sense, it is history that is applied to real-world issues. There are so many opportunities available to people who study public history, and that is what makes it so very exciting to me as an individual and as an aspiring historian. So there's just that little nudge right there. I just picked 3 methods that I want to focus on as I talk about the rest of the things that I'm going to talk about. Collecting oral histories, communing with the documents, which is something Professor Woolley would bring up in class, and that you feel when you touch archives, I believe. Like you get a sense of the people and the time period when you're touching a document that was touched by the person who created it. And so I felt that was a really apt description for digging in archives, and then creating community connections. So for oral histories, I found on the Oral History Association's website, they say oral history is a field of study and a method of gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. Oral history is both the oldest type of historical inquiry predating the written word and one of the most modern, initiated with tape recorders in the 1940s and now using 21st century digital technologies. So oral histories, both old and new. Whoops, sorry. Digging in the archives, communing with the documents. I did find the Society of American Archivists label archives as materials created or received by a person, family, or organization, public or private, and is preserved because of the enduring value contained in the information they contain, or as evidence of the functions and responsibilities of their creator. And to me, what speaks out from that is the enduring value of archives such as these. Materials that can be used and seen as archives include newspapers, journals, letters, photos, maps, magazines, tax records, and we're even stepping into more modern forms and things for archiving, such as VHS and floppy disks. And the challenges of actually bringing outdated technology into current technology is one that is still being worked on to overcome in a public history field and in archiving. And then lastly, community connections, which I'm going to touch on as I talk about the other 2 portions. One of the major ways public history makes its mark is through community collaboration. I'm not going to expound on that too much because there's a lot more to go. So A Misplaced Massacre was a book that we were required to read for our class. And this is an excellent example of a project that went from small town to federal involvement. And it would be nice if finding Sand Creek were as simple as this map up here that points directly to Sand Creek, hey, I'm here, but it was not that simple. It took a lot of time for people to come together and decide this is Sand Creek, and yes, it is a massacre. So we're gonna do just a quick little timeline here from conflict to consensus. November 29th, 1864, the question is battle or massacre. So at this particular moment, I'm going to flip to my notes. Union troops from Fort Lyon, Colorado, attacked a group of Native Americans gathered at Sand Creek, Colorado. The skirmish ends in the death of hundreds of mostly women, children, and elderly. The Union troops declare this a victorious battle. The Cheyenne and Arapaho call it a massacre. In 1909, a Confederate monument in Denver was dedicated to the Civil War soldiers of Colorado and the battles that were fought on behalf of freedom. The press reported that a hush of patriotic awe came over thousands gathered during the ceremony. The plaque on the monument declares Sand Creek one of the battle sites. 1993, the voices and demands that this moment of violence be seen as a massacre and not a battle became louder. Historians, archaeologists, tribal leaders, and members of the community all worked together to agree on the historical accuracy of this event, including where the event had taken place. 2007, just shy of 150 years after the atrocities of Sand Creek, the National Park Service dedicated the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. At the time, it was the only national site that recognized the unnecessary brutality performed by Union soldiers against people that had thought themselves under the federal government's protection. An acknowledged betrayal and one that is left as a reminder to learn by and to grow from. The narrative of Sand Creek has undergone a drastic rewrite in the last few decades. And as these images show, this is a very two-sided, many-sided tale. On the one hand, you have images of heroes against what is seen as a ferocious, death-destructing group of Native Americans. And on the other, you have the image of a mother protecting her child. The conversations that happened around this particular massacre were intense. I believe one of the things that was mentioned during the commemoration of this particular site was that someone kind of like glossed over it and made it kind of like this sunny outlook that everything was okay now because we had gotten to this consensus, and completely skipped over the fact that they had laid bare centuries of conflict between Native Americans and the United States government. And while this is a nice step, we still have a long way to go, but the conversation is started. So my group covered Indiana-Purdue Student Government Association, which I knew nothing about except that they existed on campus when I started to investigate them. And they are behind everything. They do everything. The toilet times in the bathroom stalls, IPSGA does that. They also provide funding for student groups to go on trips. The History Club is going to be looking to do some trips in the future. We will be approaching them for financing for that. They do homecoming, spring fling. If there is a club or organization on campus, they have to get approval through IPSGA before they can even become the group that they want to become. They are behind everything. It was, we called them the quiet voice on campus because they just do so much, but they aren't necessarily like flashy and in your face. So the research from class, we were each responsible for gathering oral histories. We each had to go through archives associated with the organization, and we created a digital record of Senate hearings and legislation. It took an entire day to scan in a decade's worth of paper material, but now they have this on file and they can easily access it instead of having to flip through stacks and stacks and stacks of paper, which is one of the things that public historians do. As far as challenges for this particular event, the archives were not necessarily labeled well, so it really was digging and hoping that you would find something. Oral histories, you of course have to coordinate with the other person, you have to be respectful of their time, and so that was one of those things where it was like, how can I make this happen? Where do we make this happen? And like I said, the digital record that was done, it took us an entire day, and then we also found out that like some of them did not scan into the computer properly, and we had to go back and redo them. So while it is fun to do this, it is also a challenging work to undertake. So this is my group. This is us creating our exhibit. One of the things that I really loved about this class was getting the opportunity to create an archive that would be housed at IPFW forever, we can hope. But this was like, we went through this, we created labels, which was something we learned how to do in class. We learned how to find specific artifacts that would go along with our exhibit to kind of pull things together. So yeah, I think that's everything I kind of have on that. And the last one, this is the Northside Project, which Dr. Weiner has mentioned and Professor Woolley has also mentioned. This is actually my suggestion, so I'm really excited to talk about this. So my son is a junior at Northside High School, which means that I get to go into Northside High School quite a bit for concerts. He's part of the jazz band. He's very active in his school. Thank you. So during one of his performances this last December, I was wandering out in the hallways kind of waiting, and there was this display in a glass case, and of course they're old pictures and I can't resist, so I have to walk over and I look at it, and I realize that I am now looking at this in a very different way than I ever would have looked at it before, because instead of just appreciating the fact that they have these really neat pictures out, I want to create tags for it. I want to make sure that those photos are put into something that protects them from potential future damage. I want labels so that you know that that corner that's way over there, that picture that's in the left, that's a collapsed ceiling from the auditorium when Northside was first built. It killed someone. They say that it is a ghost that now haunts Northside High School. It's one of 4. So this school has a history and they want to talk about it. I also just like this overview, this top picture of Northside High School. I don't know if anyone here went to Northside or is familiar with this school. It's really, really neat. Architecturally, it's very cool. We actually did a tour, Professor Woolley, myself. This is one of the connecting the dots, making community connections. So far, since the beginning of spring semester, we have created contacts with the Northside Alumni Association, Fort Wayne Community Schools, the Department of History at IPFW, and the Genealogy Center of ACPL. And they have all been super excited about making this project a reality. The Genealogy Center in particular is lovely. If you have not been there, go there. It's so cool. So our ideas are starting to become realities. For me, I'm a digital person. I like tech stuff. I want to see what happens with it. I want to create, design, whatever. So this is a picture I took of the first stack of papers and stuff I brought back from my meeting with the Northside Alumni Association. They were already looking to create a volume of work, but then I came to their meeting and I was like, so how about some oral histories, and how about a digital archive, and how about this, and how about that? And they were like, yes. So they handed me information, and then the picture next to it is a high resolution digital copy of this particular yearbook. So I was lucky enough to get my hands on some of the images from this yearbook. So these are all now available through the Genealogy Center at Northside High School. This is still all the yearbook of 1945. What I love about this particular section right here, so 1945, World War II, these students hustled and they got all of their stuff together and they were given the last allotment of red leather in the United States of America to bind their yearbook with. And it's in their yearbook, which is really neat. Whoops. And we're going back. So sorry. I'll try to hurry and get back through that. The next couple images are just to kind of show that things don't really change that much, but they do kind of stay the same. I'm going to hurry. Yes, I promise. Sorry. I just want to show one thing. So as much as things stay the same, things have changed. This is the Sharpshooter Club of Northside High School. They had a firing range in their high school. Their guns were provided by the school. The ammunition provided by the school. This is a far cry from where we are now. Studying history, being a part of public history, it's amazing. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, I promise I will not keep you very long and I will not touch the computer this time for last time. And I just wanted to talk a little about what we did in the public history class to study the history of our student organizations. You said that there are some differences in doing public history and these kinds of projects. And we did the research in actual archives here at IPFW. We went down into the dungeons in Humke. They got flooded during the semester. We conducted oral history with different people from the departments or the groups. I did an interview with Dr. Douglas Klein of the anthropology department, who I've had a couple classes with actually. That was very good. And we put the information that we got, we put together to create these exhibits, which you see out there. The exhibits for the anthropology department actually already existed. Those were for other things with the anthropology club. And I can thank Nick for most of our work on the anthropology club, because he is the anthropology club, or at least part of it. He's had most of the documents already, or had access to them. And then we had to write a history based on these primary sources. Many of the sources we had for the anthropology department were flyers for different club events like the lunch and lecture. You had some about, I'm sorry, I don't remember what totally was in your binder. You had some for different trips. Do you have any reports from from club meetings?
Trips, club meetings, constitutions, cinema center events, stuff like that.
Thanks. I didn't know everything that was in there. I just wrote the paper, the paper reports. I worked off of his information. He did all the research. Then we had to write a history based off of these, and our paper was, I think our paper was 15 pages of work that was divided between the three of us in our group, and the same with other groups. And then one of us had to write a report on the project, how it was conducted, what each of us did, and how it was received by the public when it was displayed in Helmke. We had people offer their suggestions and their opinions. This was the public response to our projects, and I compiled those. I compiled the responses, comments, complaints, everything. We did get some complaints actually. We had several. We had one about something that was shown on one of the boards about a luncheon lecture that was held by Dr. Borbieva, and one person was a little disturbed by the content. And so I compiled all this information and turned in a report to Professor Woolley here, and that is basically how we conducted our research and what we did with it, how we put it all together for something. I'm sorry I don't have a lot to say. That's basically all I have, so I'm sorry.
So
thank
we're
you.
Good to go.
Yes, thank you. And
thank you so much. This is a wonderful first-time panel on public history. I hope the one of many more to come. I really enjoyed all of your presentations. And so my question is, and I'm especially intrigued with the Enola Gay controversy. I've taught about that in H217 and some of these other exhibitions. And so I'd like to get from you, what do you think the role of the historian is? If you have a controversial topic like the Enola Gay, I mean, do we present it as ending World War II, the dropping of the bomb, or the beginning of the bombs race, the arms race and the Cold War? How do you as historians wrestle with those controversial topics, and how best to present that to the public without letting where is the stopping point, in other words, where you say, okay, we have enough public input, we just need to get on with the exhibition?
If that makes any sense.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, I'll go ahead and answer your question with a question. Are you asking this question in the context of an academic historian approaching the same question? A public historian. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll start.
But I will say, I don't think public history and academic history are like this, right? There is tremendous overlap between the public and academic, and I think both sides are really recognizing that as years go by. So I'd hate to see, just kind of a dual approach. I think there's a lot of overlap.
Regardless of the overlap, I still feel there is a great amount of difference in the way they approach individual questions. With public history, I believe that while the traditional views should be challenged, I think they should also at the same time be explained. Like the idea that the atomic bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima did save lives. I mean, there is some evidence to that. The home islands were very prepared for a staunch defense by the end of World War II. Counter to that, though, the invasion of Manchuria by the Soviets also was pushing Japan ever closer to peace, regardless of how staunchly they wanted to defend their home islands. So I think both sides should be equally represented when engaging the public on a topic such as that, as well as gathering information from as many primary sources as possible. Would anybody else like to answer?
I mean, kind of referring to what she, like Misplaced Massacre, I think, like I'm one of the people that want to know both sides, just like he was saying. And just like that with the Misplaced Massacre, like that was very one-sided for many years. And we didn't find out, like, hey, this wasn't a battle. There was just pretty much women and children there until further on. So I think the controversy, like, it should be hit head on, but that's just like who I am. And like, I think as long as you have all the information, you should be able to present that. So, I mean, history is an interpretation. It's how you interpret it. So I think with all the information available, you can present it to who you want, how you want, as long as they can engage with it too.
Can I add something to that? Yeah. Especially with things that like the Sand Creek Massacre and the book The Misplaced Massacre and other controversial events, we do have to avoid we have to tell both sides argument that some people make that means really, you should really only tell my side. That we have to look at both sides when people don't honestly mean that. So that they don't want to accept anybody else's side. That if somebody presents something that they don't agree with as a narrative, they will counter it with, well, we have to look at both sides. That's a better way to put it. What I mean, I think we have to avoid that somehow.
I think that based on A Misplaced Massacre is such a good example because it was such an intensive book to read and such an intensive process that the people went through. History is always being rewritten. There are always new things coming out, and societal norms, values, morals will change the way that we are asked to look at history. And because the time period in between, I think it gives us time to develop where that line should be. But I think it's always kind of fluid. It will always go back and forth. And I know I've had my mind changed about the way that I feel about certain things because of my exposure to learning historical things. And so I think that's the role of the historian, is to find that balance that incorporates as many people as possible. And it's a challenging thing to do, but it's an exciting thing to get to do.
I think we're at time.
Yeah. Please grab these guys later and check out the presentation. Good job, guys.